Mr. President,
Senator from Tennessee.
are we in a quorum call?
Yes.
I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Over the past few months, we have all watched the power that the digital community has to make someone's passing thought go viral, and the power that the digital mob has to make controversial voices completely disappear. Well, who is the digital mob exactly? Because right now we're hearing a lot about mob rule. Sometimes it's hard to tell who the mob actually is. Is it the millions of users who swarm social media platforms at the very first hint of a controversy? Or is it the professional activists who provoke many of these attacks? They seem to know just when to pitch a thought, a word, or an idea. Or could it be the platforms themselves who cave to the pressure and police speech when they don't agree with that speech? So let's drill down on this just a little bit. Today I want to focus on the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, because when it comes down to it, they're the ones that are in the driver's seat. They are the ones who end up calling the shots. For years, tech companies have waged a very public war against platform users who speak out against the popular narrative. And the executives charged with defending these calls routinely struggle to explain the arbitrary nature of their content moderation policies. Every time moderators remove a post for what is called shocking content, or cause a moral panic by placing a warning label on satire, big tech asks us to just, write it off. It was a mistake. We really didn't mean to do it. Move on. But we haven't moved on, because the platforms themselves have provided plenty of evidence to confirm that big tech's employees bring their bias to the workplace. Bear in mind, all of these employees who are developing the search models, the algorithms that are prioritizing your search, that are mining your data, that are policing your speech, they are bringing their bias and their prejudice to the workplace. These fears were confirmed back in 2017 when the New York Times reported that a Twitter employee intentionally deleted President Trump's account, not because of any violation, but because the employee had an axe to grind. They did not like President Donald Trump. This May, the Wall Street Journal revealed that Facebook set up a multi-step approval process for changes to its, and I'm quoting, integrity ranking initiative, end quote, due to, again quoting, reasonable concerns that overzealous engineers might let their politics influence the platform. Now think about that. Facebook set up a multi-step approval process for changes to its integrity ranking initiative due to reasonable concerns that overzealous engineers might let their politics influence the platform. Do you think? Of course they were. Of course they were. The problem? They've been doing it all along and trying to say, it's just your imagination, when actually it's not. Mr. President, I don't think anyone anticipated the digital platforms would become powerful enough to act as judge and jury over what information Americans should be allowed to access online. Congress certainly didn't anticipate it when drafting legislation to keep those companies in check. But they've overstepped their bounds. They continue to misbehave until we come along and slap their hand, and then they try to act as if they are going to solve their problems, which leads us to our current debate over Section 230 reform. Big Tech relies on Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act to shield themselves from content-based litigation. The statute also acts as a sword that platforms can engage to remove content they judge to be obscene, violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. In Section 230 world, then, the users are responsible for what they post, not the platform that hosts the content. The platform, however, those platforms have the right to set their own content guidelines within limits without being sued. Sounds reasonable. Section 230 is important specifically because of what it doesn't do. It does not force companies to choose between moderating every piece of content they host and letting their websites turn into the Wild West. But, as I said, no legislation could have anticipated our current digital landscape. Big tech companies like Google and Facebook now have the power to ruin. They can ruin content creators who step out of line, and it is their line. And even if those creators manage to stay on the right side of the moderators, they know their online presence, and many times this is also their livelihood, that it lives or dies at the hands of employees given the near impossible task of remaining completely neutral 100% of the time. The dynamic between users and platforms has changed. And now Congress must change the law that guides that dynamic. Here's the problem, is that this country has become so polarized, I'm not sure big tech understands what a healthy dynamic would actually look like. No longer do their choices seem to make sense to many Americans. The compulsion to flag and report and threaten has become a reflex. When the digital mob chooses to attack on any given day, then their choices are going to change with every news cycle. And as we have seen, this heavily influences how big tech chooses to police content on their platforms. You may have been saying or posting something for years, no problem. But then one day, that digital mob, because of the news cycle, will choose to attack you. Conservatives have suffered under this mob rule. There is no denying it. And there's no denying that there is a digital mob. But reform can happen without overextending the heavy hand of federal regulation over the entire tech industry. And as someone who knows what it feels like to be censored, I get it. I absolutely understand why we need these reforms and why Congress needs to act now, this year. But I also know that the more you rely on threats to motivate good corporate behavior, the more likely you'll be to find reasons to follow through on them. Mr. President, we must find stronger ways to rein in tech firms seeking to become the new speech police. We know for a fact that big tech's biases are the problem. But when did more government become the solution? We already tried that approach. We called it the fairness doctrine. Guess what? It did not work. Instead of encouraging free and fair discourse, powerful parties use those rigid standards as leverage to control speech. And I will tell you, I can think of a few things more dangerous than allowing lawmakers and bureaucrats to weaponize the full force of the federal government against the private exchange of information. What we do know is this: Big Tech's era of self-regulation is over. It no longer works. Big Tech is not a group of infant companies. They're referred to as Big Tech because they have grown. So this self-regulation is over. It is time for Congress to take an action. But punitive, one-size-fits-all standards will put these tech companies in a straitjacket. It would hamper innovation, and eventually what would happen is it would collapse the industry. Instead, we should set up and give Big Tech guidance that will encourage growth and will encourage innovation, while also making it abundantly clear that Congress will not allow Big Tech's political bias to determine what information Americans are allowed to access online. We will not allow Big Tech and their political bias to determine how information is prioritized through your search engine. We are not going to allow Big Tech and their political bias to data mine every email, every text, every search, and then use that to access your information online. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the previously referenced articles from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal be submitted into the record.
Without objection.